Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today is Psyche Loui, a professor at Wesleyan University. Psyche, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. So you've done, I mean, I look at your work in terms of academically, and on top of that, you're a musician. I had the privilege of hearing some of your compositions, by the way. So that was a lot of fun. You're the director of MIND, the Music Imaging and Neurodynamics Lab at Wesleyan. So let's talk about that. What is MIND?
MIND. Well, I think it's the combination of brain processes and cognitive processes that give rise to how we think and feel and perceive. I decided to call my lab the Mind Lab because it really is a combination of all my interests. Right? I'm really using music as a window into how the brain works and how the mind works. And so music, we do that using imaging, neuroimaging, looking at sounds as well as looking into the brain. And then neurodynamics, which is really the general study of changes in the brain.
And I assume you're using MRI or functional MRI and opportunities like that to study.
Yeah.
How is, and just in terms of your tenure doing these kinds of analyses, how has that technology changed to benefit your work?
It's changed a lot. In the past 20 years, it's really just a very, very steep curve. I think that the big change happened in the, I think it was 50s when people discovered nuclear magnetic resonance. And then that one thing led to another. And then by the 90s, people realized that you could use this to look into the brain. But the first proof of concept ideas were really like, oh, when you're looking at things, you're using the visual regions of your brain, which shouldn't be that surprising. And that really just correlates very well, or just confirms what you knew from looking at animal work. But what you can do now is ask more mysterious questions, like how do you feel when you listen to music? Why don't you feel anything? I feel something, right? So these are the more humanistic questions that I've gotten really interested in.
All right, for me, a big question. What is music?
Well, if you buy Edgar Varèse's famous definition, it's intentional sound, intentional and organized sound. Now, but if you can think about, so I teach music perception and cognition at Wesleyan, and I always get this in the first day. A student will say, well, what about 4 minutes and 33 seconds by John Cage, which was famously a piece where there was no sound at all, right? So there's this pianist that's supposed to show up on stage, and they just sit there for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And the point is that you're supposed to reconceptualize what exactly that music is. Maybe there's some environmental background noise that you integrate into music.
Is that an emperor has no clothes question?
Very much so, right? I mean, it makes you think about the context. Yeah, and I think that it does actually still satisfy the criterion of intentional sound. It's just that there's an intentional lack of sound. And I think it's much more about the intention. I mean, to me, music is a way of communicating and socially bonding, right? So we make playlists for each other. You know, we used to make mixtapes for each other, or where we go out to concerts, you know, where we all rock out together. I mean, and those things are, I mean, that's very different from, you know, going to the Aspen Music Festival and learning how to play violin for many years, although that's part of what humans do. But really the celebration and enjoyment of music is much more, I'd say, fundamental and universal than just the practice of Western classical music, for instance.
Why else do humans create music?
Yeah, there's lots of reasons, and there's lots of theories behind this. So Steven Pinker from Harvard University famously thought that music is auditory cheesecake, which means that it gives you calorific content, but it's not really good for you. Now, the people in the field of music cognition don't really buy that idea because music does lots of things to the human race, right? Darwin thought that music might have been useful for sexual selection. And we also know that there's music.
Back up. All right, tell me more about how does that work in terms of people liking the same music or music affecting people?
In terms of if you make music, you're more likely to, if you sing well, you're more likely to make more, right? So think Mick Jagger. I mean, they're like the rock star.
I don't find him particularly attractive.
I don't either, but people do, right? I mean, I think it's the idea of rock stars attract mates. Now, I don't think that explains all of music, because not every time we listen to music we end up mating, right? But I think that is part of it. But if you think about things like work songs and protest songs, songs that are made to promote a kind of group identity, I think it comes down to human race using music as a means to bond socially.
All right, how about other forms of life? Well, what kind of music do they create, and for what purpose?
Oh yeah, so that's great. And for a long time, people thought that music was unique to humans and that other animals don't share it. But then it turns out that lots of other animals do make sounds that could be music, or could be musical. So birdsong is a really good example, but maybe you might think that birdsong is actually not more like song, it's actually more like speech, right? So it has these spectral components that are a bit like speech, and it has these kinds of repetition.
Well, the two aren't mutually exclusive.
No, not at all, right? And most theories actually posit that they co-evolved up to a certain point. But then people started asking about other kinds of musical activities like dance, right? So do other animals also bop to music? And there was this great YouTube video that came out, I want to say 2008 or 2009, of this parrot called Snowball that knew how to dance to Backstreet Boys.
To any Backstreet Boys song, or to one song?
I think it's Backstreet's Back. And what was really interesting...
Great song.
Great song, yeah. I think he started out doing that by imitating his owners. But
I thought you were going to say the cat, but...
Well, if cats could bop, that would be a great finding, too. That actually hasn't been shown yet, but I know lots of people are... Actually,
I think it has, but I think there's been a little digital work on that video.
Well, if you auto-tune, or yeah. So then Ani Patel, who's a professor at Tufts University, went and did this actual experiment where he gave some Backstreet Boys recordings to Snowball, and it turns out that when you speed up the Backstreet Boys, Snowball would speed up the dancing. When you slow it down, he would slow down. So it's not just imitating, right? It's actually beat matching, or synchronizing. And then there was another sea lion. I forget the name of the sea lion, but it could also bop, right? So it wasn't just birds. Right? So I think there's a really active line of work right now from people in different countries trying to find, to what extent do other animals share these kind of fundamentally musical abilities.
Yeah, to me that's pretty extraordinary. My guess is we're going to find a lot more of that in the animal world.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. We will be right back with Professor Psyche Loui in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Safely stop fires around your home. Introducing the Fire Ice XT 20-ounce aerosol canister. Fire Ice XT is an eco-friendly water-based fire suppressant gel. Unlike a traditional fire extinguisher, Fire Ice XT is a highly effective, non-toxic firefighting agent that is easy and safe to use around your home, family, and pets. Available at Amazon.com or call 800-924-4874.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We are with Professor Psyche Loui of Wesleyan University. So is music ever created unintentionally, in your opinion?
No. I mean, I think that it's the intention that makes music. Maybe that's controversial. I'd be curious to hear what other people think. But I think that, why would 4 minutes and 33 seconds be considered music? Because somebody thought of it as music, right? And I've been to a few of these avant-garde composer summer institutes, and where a bunch of composers talk about their work. And there's some of this new music can be quite inaccessible, right? It's quite different from radio hits. But what they've done a lot of times, some examples are they go to a field and take a field recording of things like sounds walking, footsteps walking, right? And then they take that home and turn that into a piece. And I think according to this view of music, by imposing a structure and an intention on it, they're turning it into music. So I think it's much more about how you can turn seemingly unmusical material into music than finding music where there was no intention.
Yeah. I call that genre crappy music, by the way.
Yeah, well, I used to think that, but I guess...
You're more broad-minded than I am, so.
I feel like since I've started to study music and the brain, I've become more flexible about how I think about music and more open-minded. I mean, if you listen to music of other cultures, some of them sound quite different from what we would call music, but I don't think that makes it crappy, right? I mean, I think I just have become more embracing of the diversity of sounds that can be called music.
I will try to be more open-minded. When you study the human brain, tell me a little bit about that in terms of fMRI or whatever.
Yeah.
What have you found, what have you seen in terms of how the human brain works in the creation of music and the reception of music, and what kind of progress in terms of your research have you been able to make?
Well, there's a few major classes of brain studies. There's structural studies and functional studies. So structural studies are just looking at what the brain looks like and how it's connected, what parts are larger than others. And there's a whole line of work on looking at musicians versus non-musicians, and looking at people as they learn music over time and looking at what happens to changes in the brain.
What are some of those findings?
Well, a really good example is there's this major pathway in the brain called the arcuate fasciculus, and since the 19th century, it's been known that that's a pathway of the brain that's important for language, and it connects the areas of the brain that are important for hearing and the areas of the brain that are important for speaking. So if you don't have this pathway, you can't repeat sentences that are spoken to you. So for a long time, people thought that that pathway was for language. But then it turns out that we're seeing that it's important for music as well. So if you are tone deaf or congenitally music, you can't carry a tune, you can't hear differences between pitches. We've shown that people who are tone deaf have less of a volume in the arcuate fasciculus. And then we've also shown that people who have training in music, especially in singing, have more volume in arcuate fasciculus. And then some colleagues in Edinburgh have actually traced the change of that branch of pathway in the brain as people learn to play, do you know Guitar Hero? Yeah, so it's an auditory motor mapping exercise. And they train people on playing Guitar Hero for a week, and then it turns out that that pathway in the brain became larger and better connected. So I think there's pretty good evidence for this major pathway in the brain that's not unique to language, but also kind of co-opted for music.
Do you think it's transferable, the concept? Can you transfer the concept of doing certain activities, doing certain kinds of training that will enlarge other parts of the brain unrelated to music, and especially for people who've suffered brain injuries?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of work now on transfer effects of training, and I think Of course, if you train on music, you'll get good at music, but does it also help your language? And it looks like it does. I mean, there are some things that it helps. And then it also helps executive function, which has really important implications for education, right? So children who are learning music for many years, they turn out to not just sing better, but they also share more, and they also are better at paying attention. And I think that's a really important effect of music. I mean, not to say that we should only be training in music just so we can train those other things, but you know, I believe in training for music's sake. But it's really interesting to see that this training can have some benefits for other areas as well.
How about the relationship between music and people who do have brain or motor function injuries? What has been done in that area?
Yeah, there's a few neurologically based music therapies. So a really good example is melodic intonation therapy. I'm glad you asked that because it really kind of piggybacks right off of what we just said about the arcuate fasciculus. So it turns out that there are some people after a stroke, right, they get aphasia, which means they can't talk, but they can sing. So there's this interesting dissociation where if you ask a patient to say the words to happy birthday, they can't say it. But if you ask them to sing, they can sing it with the words. So that kind of makes you think that, well, maybe if you just sing with them enough, then they'll recover some of their functions. And it does turn out that that is the case. So you have to train them very intensely. But it turns out that after this is melodic intonation therapy, after singing with a therapist for some months, they end up regaining some of their language functions. And then the corresponding pathways in the brain are also changed.
That is very cool.
Yeah, so it's very important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do some people, I mean, there are people out there, obviously a minority of the human population, who can create extraordinary volumes of music in terms of writing songs or whatever, while many of us can't come up with one original composition. What do you attribute such an extraordinary variation to?
Well, I think there are individual differences in creativity. Part of it, I think, is training, right? So if you decide to go to composition school, you will end up composing. But I do think there are some individual differences. And I think it's correlated with personality. Right? People who write a lot of music tend to be more open to experiences. So there are personality differences. But I think a lot of it is also just letting go. I mean, it sounds like the let it go. I mean, but You're
a fan of Frozen, obviously.
Yes. How could you not be? It's so catchy. Yeah, but what we're seeing is that people who improvise music a lot and do so very fluently tend to have less activity in the executive function regions of the brain, but more activity in the default network of the brain. So it's this interplay between areas that are important for rule-based monitoring of what's going on and areas that are important for default functions that include thinking about yourself or just ruminating, just thinking about life in general. That is really important for the creation of music. Yeah.
So is that an argument for taking drugs to compose music?
It's an argument for taking lessons to compose music. I mean, I think it's an argument for I think being open to the idea that there's more than one way to be creative, right? I mean, if you can only compose when you're taking drugs, then you might not improve as much as if you maybe occasionally don't mind taking drugs, but also do a lot of other kinds of training, right? So I think that you need multiple forms of input too.
Very diplomatically said. All right, we'll be right back with Psyche Loui for our final segment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
The Rexall Broadcaster of the Year Award recognizes an individual who, through leadership, skill, and dedication, is advancing the broadcast industry in our state and our nation. Tonight, we honor Aaron Harber. Aaron has worked extensively in the media as a host, producer, political and economic commentator, and columnist. Today, the Aaron Harber Show is the focus of his media involvement. Aaron, It is a privilege to present you with the Rex Howe Broadcaster of the Year Award. Congratulations.
Just make journalism great again. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program, so send your suggestions to aaron@harbortv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment with Professor Psyche Loui of Wesleyan University. So, how can some people be pitch perfect and, as you mentioned, some are tone deaf? How does that happen?
Well, absolute pitch is the ability to categorize notes without a reference, right? And that's correlated with a bunch of things. People who are a little bit obsessive compulsive are a little bit more likely to have it. People who tend to categorize things are a little bit more likely to have it. And some people think, oh, maybe it relates to autism. But it turns out that people who score highly on the ability to categorize also tend to have more absolute pitch, but they don't tend to have lower social skills. So it's not correlated with autism. But yeah, people with absolute pitch, it's actually much more about the ability to categorize than the better perception per se. So there's this distinction between perception and categorization. And what tone deaf people have, on the other hand, is a lack of fine-grained discrimination or perceptual abilities, whereas absolute pitch musicians have more of a categorization ability. So they're on different ends of different spectrums. So it's not just that one is a good version of the other.
How does being a musician yourself help you in your research?
I think it helps generate intuitions, and that turn into testable hypotheses that then get pursued in a systematic, rigorous, empirical study. I mean, I think I'm always inspired by like my own experiences in life. You know, like if I see somebody who says they don't like the same song I do, I'm like, why is that, right? So I guess it's a nerdy way to just generate more hypotheses and always be testing them. But I think it's really important to stay, I think when you're doing science, to stay close to the problem. And I think that in any kind of behavioral and cognitive science and neuroscience, what we're trying to do is understand the mind. And so if you're starting with the mind, you're working closer to the problem, I think.
What kind of research have you done or seen in regard to music and its ability to change our moods and maintain that change, not just a transitory or ephemeral change?
Well, a lot of people use music to regulate their moods, and they also use seeking music as a form of, I think, just intellectual involvement. And I think people use music to bond with other people, right? So there's a few different functions of modern uses of music. But something I've gotten really interested in is chills, right? Why is it that, you know, when you're driving along and this song comes up on the radio, you suddenly like can't pay attention to anything else. You have to listen to it, right? And people call it a skin orgasm, right? and it does induce these physiological responses to you. I mean, people, they actually literally get chills. You can record that they get a little bit sweatier, their heart rate increases. So all these physiological changes, I think, are induced by changes in expectation, right? So I think that good composers implicitly know that, you know, when I change this chord, it's making you feel this way, right? And so there's this correspondence between these compositional elements of music and psychological or cognitive or physiological changes. And so I think that's how music can systematically change your mood or your emotions.
All right, how about in terms of how often we want to hear music? I drive the people around me crazy because if I find a song I like, for example, Foster the People does a song called Sit Next to Me. I don't know if you've ever heard it. I'll play it like 100 times in a row and drive everyone around me crazy. But not that many people do something like that. What's wrong with me?
Maybe you have a musicophilia. There was a really famous case that's in Oliver Sacks's book, Musicophilia, of a person who I think was after a stroke, turned out to love music and keep listening to it like obsessively. Yeah, and I think maybe it's, I mean, maybe let me ask you this. Is it, does it tell you something about your life? Like, is it autobiographically important to you?
Songs can be, but sometimes, I mean, I'll hear a song, often for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, if I hear a Taylor Swift song I really like, then if it's the first time I've heard it or around that time, I will play that song repeatedly and drive everyone, as I said, around me crazy. But then I'll go on to eventually another song.
So you go through a phase.
I just wanted to know if I had some musical-related illness that I should know about.
I don't think so. I mean, I've also done a lot of work on repetition of music. And there's this thing called mere exposure effect, and it's been found since the 60s, where if you show people unfamiliar things over time, repeatedly, over and over again, after a while, people think that that is a good thing, right? So they learn to like it. So the classic example is like these fake Chinese characters that were repeatedly shown to these, I think it was Stanford undergrads. And after a while, people thought that the repeated words were more auspicious than the unrepeated words. Right? So you tend to associate those with good things. And we see that in music as well, right? So very unfamiliar, maybe even strange sounding melodies, after you hear them over and over again, you tend to like them more.
Why do we, some of us or most of us, why are we able to retain a song, sing a song, know the lyrics, often after hearing it only 2 or 3 times, while we forget so many other things that are important?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that gets into really important therapeutic aspects or potentials of music, right? I mean, I think music is a really unique way to access all sorts of different areas of your brain. And if you have a neurodegenerative disorder like Alzheimer's, right, if you have severe dementia, there's quite a lot of evidence now where people with late-stage Alzheimer's listen to a song from their 20s, and suddenly it's like it's like they're transported to a different world, and they're talking and laughing and just much more alive than their normal state. So I think that we might be able to find some ways to use music to help slow down or maybe even reverse or stop neurodegenerative disorders.
That's good to know. I'll keep in mind those Taylor Swift songs. Okay, last question. We're running out of time. Does the United States as a country, in terms of its production of music, how do we compare to other countries?
Well, the really kind of outlandish statement that was in my old music history textbook was the United States has dominated music making in the 20th and 21st centuries. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that there are some genres that the United States dominates on, but there are other genres like experimental music. I think that Europe, for instance, is much more advanced in that.
All right. Psyche, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
It has been, and that was Professor Psyche Loui. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.